Hello my fellow car design enthusiasts. Now there is another version of the Lamborghini Huracan, and that's called the Tecnica. So what we're going to do in this video is talk about this design, because this design is really interesting. To me, it's not just another version of the Huracan, it's actually a clear preview of what the next generation will look like. That's what I think this is. So I want to show you the evolution of variants of the Huracan that we have seen over the years and how it built up to this shape that we see here in the Tecnica. It's really interesting, and then I'm gonna compare it to a redesign of the Huracan that I did a few months ago, I think 4 or 5 months ago or something like that, and show you the comparison between the Tecnica and the redesign. And also, now that I see the Tecnica, I can let you know what kind of changes the redesign needs to make in order to make it even more like the next generation Huracan. So a little more on that later in the video. First of all, let's have a look at some of the tech and spec of the new Tecnica. You can think of the new Tecnica as the best part of all previous versions of the Huracan put into one car. It's got more power than the Evo, and it's more daily driver oriented than the track focused STO. And as I'm sure you know, the Huracan is coming to the end of its production cycle. However, there will be one more version after the Tecnica, so they're not done with the Huracan yet, and that will be a high-riding safari version of the Huracan that even has underbody protection. This is stuff that only Lamborghini would make, and I absolutely love it. I can't wait to see that final off-road Huracan before they kill it off. So the Tecnica will be priced around $245,000, and for that you get a 631 horsepower version of the 5.2 liter naturally aspirated V10, and it's rear-wheel drive only. It's been designed, as I said, more for regular road use than the STO's track-focused approach. However, what's more interesting is, as I said, the front end design. It's clear that it's a preview of what the next generation will look like. But first of all, before we go into the next generation and talk about that, I want to show you kind of how this front end built up over the years with the generations or the versions of the Huracan that we've seen so far. This is the first generation right here. Came out in, I think, 2016, 15 maybe, I can't really remember, I might be wrong on that. But to me, it was a little bit of a tame design for a Lamborghini. It looks definitely more Audi-ish. You can definitely tell that Audi had a say in this design. It's not as crazy as the Countach, the Outlaw, or the Aventador, even though Aventador was designed under Audi as well, and so was the Murcielago and the Gallardo, which dialed it down a little bit when it came into Audi ownership. And I think that was the case with the new Huracan here when it came out a few years ago. It looks a little tame, but it still has a clear Lamborghini DNA, specifically in the front view right here, and I'm gonna focus on the front view in this video. You also have these lines. I've talked about these lines before. This is typical Lamborghini DNA to have these lines in the hood go from the base being a little wider, and then up top in the windshield you have them be narrower as they go up along this hood. Usually what you see in most cars, I would say 95% of the cars, is the opposite. So you have these lines going something like this. And I think that's a clear, distinct Lamborghini design feature. If you just look at a hood and you want to know what car it is, see if they have angled lines like that, and you're gonna know that it is a Lamborghini DNA feature. Now, moving on to the Performante down here, you can see that these wings of the Performante, they kind of moved this way and got more squished in the corners. I really like this design approach. It kind of feels like this area is a little too squished maybe. Maybe you want to have this wing stick out a little further to give it some breathing room here, but it definitely sets the Performante apart from the regular version. And of course, you also have some changes in the rear view of the Performante as well to set it apart from the regular Huracan. But other than that, not really a lot of changes in the front end over the normal Huracan before we go into the Evo. And now we can clearly see where Lamborghini is going with their front end design, because this is the first time in the Huracan lineup that we see the integration of these Y shapes that we've seen on a lot of concepts up until this point. And this is going to be a Lamborghini design feature moving forward, I would say, for maybe the next 20 years or something like that, to have some sort of implementation of this Y shape in the front end. And here they are implemented in the wings. As you can see, we also now have this body colored piece that we don't have on the Performante up here. and I think it looks really good. It adds some complexity to the front end that I think was lacking in the original Huracan. It looks a little too simple. So, you know, Lamborghinis is supposed to be a little crazy when it comes to styling. Not everything has to have a specific purpose. You can go crazy with the styling of a Lamborghini and still have it perform at a top level, and I think that's what's happening here in the Evo. How did this piece change for the new Tecnica? You can see that this part is going to become more and more a key feature of the front end, and you can see that right here in the Tecnica. Now, this piece, this graphic feature, is a big part, almost I would say the key graphic of the front end of the Tecnica. You can see that it goes up here and stretches far up on the fender right here, creating this cut. And in this cut, you also have the housing of the headlights. I think it looks really cool. And if you look at this from sort of a side view, this piece right here on the side is going to create a forward arrow looking motion, which adds to the motion of the car when it sits still. It has this clear, almost the entire silhouette of the car is now an arrow moving forward and pointing in the direction where the car is going. And I think that's a really cool design approach, not just by implementing this Y shape in the front end in this massive way, but also from a side view creating a direction for the car when it's sitting still. What's new also, since we have this cut now in the body, we also have this that automatically creates this wing that sits underneath the headlight, and I think that looks pretty cool as well. It also adds some complexity to the front end that I think the Huracan needs, but we still have this clear design wing at this clear graphic feature, which is this wing sticking out, which we had I would say since the beginning of the Huracan lineup, and that is still there. And also this piece looks very similar to the ones we have in the early Huracans, so there's not a lot of changes in the midsection of the car or the lower part of the car. What's going on, the big changes are always happening in the far corners of the car, and that's why I think the next generation Huracan is going to take this a step further and implement this Y shape right here. That will now become the daytime running lights on the next generation Huracan. I'm going to show you that rendering in just a second. First, I want to show you the side view as I talked about, and this forward direction of this design. Of course, we have the key lines of Lamborghini right here. We have this sharp line that is almost one continuous curvature. Even in the A-pillar, you can barely see that it has a defined hood here because the A-pillar stops almost right above the front axle. Of course, you have the mid-engine right here, which allows for the A-pillar to stick that far forward. But comparing this to, for example, the other opposite end of the spectrum of A-pillar positioning, for example, the Mercedes SLS AMG, for example, it's interesting to see just how different those two cars in proportions. That, of course, I know has a front engine, so you can't have this type of design there, but it's just interesting. That's, I would say, the two extreme spectrums of, or the two endpoint in the spectrum of car design when it comes to designing a silhouette for a car. It's interesting to analyze those kind of things, looking at it specifically from a side view. And I want to show you this front feature here that creates this arrow looking design now. So we have almost, you can see that this creates essentially an arrow going from the rear. If we just have a one line stretching from this point right here, key line of Lamborghini, stretching down to this arrow that creates this forward leaning motion with this new graphic that we have on the Tecnica. Also love this cut in the rear end. It also adds to some sort of sharpness that that the Huracan needs in its body. I think it would need a little bit more sharpness down here, for example, in this surface, to make it more aggressive and more stylized, and in my opinion more in line with the original Lamborghini DNA. But it's still clearly a Lamborghini, and I love the Huracan design just because of this silhouette, chiseled, sharp design that we have looking at it specifically from a side view. Looking at the rear view before we compare it to the rendering, if you want to speak of bazooka exhaust, I think this is probably the case, the best example of it right here. Just look at how far out these sticks out. These look like rocket launchers in the back, and I absolutely love it. And I also love that they have this hexagonal shape in the exhaust tailpipes themselves that we have. That is also a clear distinction by Lamborghini to have this type of shape all over the cars, also in their interiors. Another thing that I think is really cool with the Tecnica is that it cuts the rear fender right here. So the fender doesn't stretch all the way to this point. That means that we can actually see and appreciate the width of the rear tires, specifically looking at this car from a straight rear view. You're just gonna appreciate the massiveness of the tires when you have them exposed like this by cutting the fender at this point instead of having the body like covering that piece up. So being a mix between the STO and the Evo, this Tecnica now gets this wing up here. I'm not sure if I'm a fan of the wing. Of course, it suits a Lamborghini to have a wing like this, but I absolutely love the Evo's tail when you have this little subtle ducktail right here in the middle. That's one of my favorite features of the Evo, and I think I would prefer to have that rear end, but with the front end of the Tecnica. That to me would be the perfect Huracan design, I would think, in my opinion. Now let's have a look at the rendering that I did a couple of months ago. So that's obviously down here in the bottom. And I think what Lamborghini is going to do with the next Huracan is to create some sort of light up here. Maybe they will have the light somewhere in this position. But what I'm almost 100% certain of is that this feature right here, this is a clear preview of where the daytime running light is going to go, almost like we have in the Cyan, in the Terzo Millennio concept and so on. And I think it's going to look something like this down here. Maybe the headlight is going to be cut a little sooner right here. So this is body part, and also since we see this arrow line right here, I think it looks so good in a side view that I think they probably will expand the body lines into this point as well and have this piece be body colored, and also maybe cut the headlight a little thinner to create this forward arrow looking from a side view and not have so much headlight space and air intake space down here, instead creating this angular shape of the front end. But I think it will be pretty close to what we see here. I hope so. That would be cool to see Lamborghini do something like this and really implement the graphics that we've seen in so many concepts back from 2017, now finally being implemented in their production cars. Really cool update for the Huracan. As I said, I can't wait for the last version of the Huracan, the Safari version. It's just nuts to think about, but that's Lamborghini for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.